Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Monday, May 25th, 2026, Memorial Day, and today we're talking about pumpkins and preparing your farm for weather that can't stop, won't stop being weird. So let's do it. All right, happy Monday, everyone, and happy Memorial Day. I hope everyone had a nice weekend, and for some of you, that weekend is still going on. Not me. I'm a farmer. The gardens have no patience for long weekends, really. Here, we had a very, very wet weekend with flash flood warnings yesterday, as it just continued. My precip app tells me we got about 5 inches of rain since Thursday, which I think is 127-ish millimeters, but I know it is just a boatload. And we definitely needed rain for sure, but like some rain? My kids really, really wanted to go to the park. They're in there. Yep. 5 inches in that's like an entire month's worth of rain in 4 days. Anyway, we fared all right, I think, through the rain. The grass and the living pathways are certainly into it. Also, this weekend, Brighton secured some European football for next year, so that was exciting. And on that front, shouts to Andrew Stagiv, UTFG, for winning our No-Till Growers Premier League Fantasy League. Good job on that, Andrew, and shoot us an email to notillgrowers@gmail so we can get your contact info. We are also 2.5 weeks from the World Cup. I can't wait for that, even though it was way more convenient for me when the games were at like 4 a.m. in November, like they were when the World Cup was in Qatar. I mean, that fit my schedule pretty well, I'm not gonna lie. I'm tempted to drive down to Atlanta to catch a game, but these World Cup ticket prices are just outrageous, and they have to land in the real world first before I can do that. Anyway, I'll save all that for the Farmers on Footy podcast, which admittedly is not a thing, though I am perpetually tempted. Got a big day of sending out lists and catching up on the farm today. What are you all up to? Let us know, or better yet, send in one of those 20-second farm video clips to farmermike@notillgrowers.com. Just upload it to Drive or Dropbox or whatever and share it with Mike. All right, so it is Monday, where every week this year we are digging into a single, less talked about crop in a series we're calling Planting and Raving, because it's super alliterative with Monday, right? Planting and Raving Mondays. Is that how alliteration works? Anywho, today the crop we're going to cover is pumpkins. We've done shows on winter squash in general, and I did touch on gourds in the crops that you don't eat show, but pumpkins are quite a diverse group of winter squashes because they come in so many different shapes and sizes. Some are highly edible, some are decorative, some are competitive. So let's kind of run the whole gamut of pumpkins a little bit here today. First, I thought pumpkins might be a good crop for right now because, well, we just started our pumpkins a couple weeks ago, as well as our winter squash and the milpa patch, because pumpkins are a fairly long season crop. I plan to shove them into some cover crops this week. Now, I could have waited a few weeks to start them as well, and if anything should happen to the pumpkins, I have enough time to recover. So there is still time for you to grow them pretty much no matter where you are. If you are in anywhere near our region, which is Kentucky, Zone 6B, I will be honest though that I don't grow a ton of pumpkins. Like many things we talk about in this lesser talked about crop segment, they are not super profitable. Long season crops rarely are, but especially when you are talking about only a few pumpkins per vine and vines that are planted like 3 feet apart. That's just not a lot of product for that amount of space. And again, if I wanted to match the profitability of, say, like lettuce, I'd have to charge $75 per pumpkin or more, which Central Kentucky ain't the market for that, I'm afraid. Okay, so varieties. Our favorite pumpkin variety for the last decade and a half has been Winter Luxury. This is a pie pumpkin. It's gorgeous, but the flavor is absolutely unmatched. It's rich and nutty and sweet when roasted and will make the best pumpkin pie you've ever had. They are a little smaller in size, but mighty in deliciousness. I think that's how you would say that. Now, we don't grow jack-o'-lantern pumpkin style pumpkins ourselves, but if you're a fan of carving stuff, perhaps smashing stuff, jack-o'-lantern is the category that you would look for, and they come in a surprising array of shapes and sizes, but the color tends to be just that classic jack-o'-lantern orange, whereas you can look for the category of specialty pumpkins and get all array of blue and orange and even red pumpkins, some with bumps called corking or warding, and every manner of shape and size. I like the specialty pumpkins a little bit, and we've grown Rouge Vite de Tempe, which is like a cool little French red one, many years ago, and not only was it striking in its appearance, but the flavor flavor was pretty solid. A lot of times these specialty pumpkins can be both display and good eats, but make sure to read the descriptions well, because if it doesn't say anything about how it tastes, there's probably a reason for that. There are also what are called large or giant pumpkins, which are just the really big ones that you see on display at stores and sometimes at farmers markets, though to be honest, they often take up so much room. I mostly only see them when somebody brings like a wagon. Now, those giant pumpkins are not to be confused with competitive pumpkins, which I'm not going to go too much into here. There's a whole world of forums and communities around that stuff, and it's super nuanced and calculated, so I would head there to understand how best to find the right seeds and the right procedures for that sort of stuff. I'm not going to knock that hobby too much because it gets people into gardening and it really shows how innovative we can be with nature. I'm also sure there are things to be learned from how, they time their waterings and fertility treatments, etc. But, it's a giant, largely inedible pumpkin that uses a lot of water and fertility. Might I recommend competitive leeks instead? Because at least that way you can have a little potato leek soup at the end, or actually quite a bit of it. Anyway, on the profitability side, there just isn't a ton there with pumpkins unless you're going to do like a U-pick or something where the harvesting labor and transport is on the customer. That said, having an item like that to be able to sell over the first half of the winter is really helpful for balancing out the season and having some winter cash flow like in a CSA, a farm store, etc. But that does require growing space in the summer, so it doesn't really, change the profitability of them. And pumpkins are not as long lasting in storage as other winter squash. But when, things like markets and gardens alike start to cool down in the fall, pumpkins and other winter squashes along those lines can certainly boost cash flow. Anyway, what say you all on the pumpkin marketing variety stuff? What is your pumpkin of choice? Let us know. And we'll talk growing, harvesting, and curing in the third segment. Up next, though, we're going to talk about farming in this climate. Yeah, I've made that joke before, but like any good dad joke, it really only gets funnier every time you say it. Anyway, BRB. Today's episode is brought to you by Grown By. Grow smarter with Grown By, the farmer-owned cooperative. Grown By is the platform for online sales of everything, custom and traditional CSAs, halves of beef, flower bouquets, wholesale to restaurants, and now Grown By supports in-person sales too. Their new app, Grown By Register, you can supercharge your market and farm stand, finally bringing together your online and offline sales and customer data. Grown By is proud to make local food accessible by processing SNAP benefits online and in person right within the app. Grown By helps you put your best food forward. Schedule a demo at coop.grownby.com/no-till. That's coop.grownby.com/no-till. All right, back to the show. A quick and loving reminder that if you, the listener or viewer, are enjoying this podcast, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes to us from Patreon member Jesse Turretts, who writes, quote, "Hey Jesse, this winter in LA has been between 10 and 25 degrees above average. Had a heat wave hitting 100 degrees for the past 2 weeks. All of my cold season crops died or struggled until rapidly going to bolt. With climate change always throwing us a curveball, no matter where you live, how do you know when it's the right time to pivot? Is it just a feeling, or do you have a rubric? Between the critters and the weather, a garden as small as mine just isn't producing how I want it to. Thanks as always," end quote. Okay, so great questions here, and also just a good topic in general, because any career or hobby that relies on the weather is always going to be a little bit bonkers, but especially at a time when wholesale shifts in weather patterns are occurring from the change in location of the tornado alley, welcome to Kentucky, I guess, to the heavy rainfall patterns we are seeing in the east and the droughts we are seeing out west. Extreme is kind of just the game now. So how, as growers, are we supposed to account for that on an individual level as opposed to a national structural level, which also needs significant addressing? To start, the word that I think I don't say enough in this context of weather and shifting weather patterns is resiliency. When we're talking about no-till, we're really talking about farm resiliency. When we're talking about a good business practice, we're talking about creating resilient farms. This show is about a lot of things, including soccer, but it's largely about this exact question. How do we make our farms and gardens resilient in the face of extreme and unpredictable weather? So yes, the first part of it is knowing what your climate is capable of. For instance, here in Kentucky, we are capable of comparatively smaller droughts than out west, but droughts nonetheless. So we need to have the worst case scenario covered water-wise. We are capable of high winds, so everything needs to be battened down or easily secured before wind events. Heavy rainfall, as evidenced by this weekend, is a biggie now that we have to deal with, as heavy rainfall events have increased 40 to 50% over the last half decade or so, which for my farm means keeping the soil covered and building the gardens in such a way that they can drain. It also means not starting gardens and farms in places that haven't flooded in a long time because they are much more likely to flood now. Like I often say, 1,000-year floods are no longer waiting those 1,000 years. Bottomland used to be really valuable, and price-wise it still is, but whoo boy, is that a risky endeavor there to put a market garden on bottomland. Soil organic matter has always been gold, but especially now as it helps to manage droughts and oversaturation alike, magical stuff, that organic matter. For places where heat and sunshine are increasing, shade will be a big factor, and trees can do a lot of that work when planned out well. A lot of growers in harsher climates have moved to growing almost exclusively under covers like high tunnels and cat tunnels for a reason. Farming is a lot easier when you control most of the weather, and a little bit of shade and diffuse light from that plastic comes along with those tunnels. That's nice. All that to say, study what your area is capable of and start adapting your farm to handle the worst that the world can throw at it. There will always be extremes you can't really account for or, be resilient to. Like for you in Cali, that may be like a fire or an earthquake. Only so much you can do, with a shaking farm. And for me, it would be something like a tornado. There's only so much preparation you can do for a tornado. That's why things like insurance come in handy, which getting insurance in places that are on the coast is increasingly impossible. So that's fun. But for the vast majority of extreme weather, almost all of us will inevitably face. A good resiliency plan will do a lot of the work for you. Great question. And let us know, listeners, what your approach is. Otherwise, oops, Cinderella's calling. She needs a lift. Be right back. Nailed it. Today's episode is brought to you by BCS America. If you're practicing no-till or low-till farming, you know that heavy equipment is often the enemy of your soil structure. That's where BCS two-wheeled tractors come in. Built for small farms, market gardens, and regenerative growers, BCS tractors give you the power to manage beds efficiently without unnecessary compaction. For the low and no-till grower, there are two attachments that change the game. The BCS Power Harrow stirs only the top inch or two of soil to incorporate soil amendments and create a perfect seed bed without soil inversion or pulling up weed seeds. And when it's time to terminate cover crops, that flail mower shreds organic matter into a beautiful, nutrient-rich mulch right on top of the bed. To find your local dealer and see the full lineup of attachments designed for the way you farm, head to bcsamerica.com. That's bcsamerica.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by Good Agriculture. If the season is picking up and the pile of receipts is starting to grow, you're not alone. Good Agriculture handles farm bookkeeping so you can stay ahead of the mess before it piles up. They keep your books organized each month, help you understand what's coming in and what's going out, and show you where your farm stands so you can make better business decisions throughout the season. If you're behind, they'll help get everything caught up. They also help farmers find funding and stay ahead of grant deadlines. You run the farm, they help the business. Learn more at goodagriculture.com/info. That's goodagriculture.com/info. All right, back to the show. Okay, so growing pumpkins. The reality with pumpkins is that they take up a lot of space, grow slowly, enjoy more than their fair share of diseases, and once they get to a certain size, become almost impossible to cultivate. In fact, on the weeds front, the cultivation front, this is why so many large-scale pumpkin operations that you'll see rely on heavy plastic mulches. Once the plants vine out, you can't really be cultivating in between them, or you will step on the vines and fruit and damage your yields. So not only is fertility wildly important with this crop, like I always point out, there is a reason that the best squash you will ever grow is always whatever comes up in your compost pile. So not only is good addition of compost important, but so too is weed control. Now, to some extent, the large leaves will do some weed blocking for you, right? Like they put out a nice little canopy, but you have to get the plants to that stage first, which can be tricky and slow. So for pumpkins, what I prefer is to start the plants in wind strip trays 3 or so weeks before I plan on planting them. Again, with cucurbits, you don't want to mess with the roots too much, and I find that wind strip trays that allow for air pruning are the best at reducing the transplant shock while also not allowing roots to mingle. Now, you can also directly sow them, but they are slow to germinate and grow. Transplanting allows you to get the weeds under control while the crop grows in the greenhouse so that when you put the crop in the ground, it's going to outrun most of the weeds. If you do plan to direct sow them, however, soak them in some sort of compost tea or extract overnight to speed up that process a little bit. That'll just get them ready to germinate. And it's got to be warm outside. Pumpkins like shorts and t-shirt weather. Just think about that. The plants really need about 3 feet between them in the rows, that's like just under 1 meter, and about 6 feet between beds, just under 2 meters, which, yes, is a lot of space. Like if you have 4x4 raised bed, that's 2 or 3 plants if you really squeeze them in there. Now, with planting, we go closer to 5.5 feet between beds because that's literally how the distance between the center of the bed and the other center of the bed. And we do try to go about 3 feet in between plants. Also, I like to put a little wet compost in the planting hole of each one just because, well, pumpkins dig compost, and that'll help give them a nice little nitrogenous start to their lives. Obviously, you can also involve these in milpa style plantings, which we do in separate rows and beds from the corn. Like we don't plant the corn and the squash in the same bed. We kind of alternate, or at least that's what I've been trying, and to good effect so far. But anyway, I do that in separate rows from our corn, our beans, and sunflower. So it would be like corn, bean, sunflower row, then squash, corn, bean, sunflower row, then squash, etc. Cover crops and pumpkins are a match made in heaven if you can get the weeds under control before the cover crop goes into the ground. And then so that way, when you terminate that cover crop and get it ready for the pumpkins, you don't have like a bunch of grass growing through it. Basically, grow a cover crop over winter, kill it around now, like May, at least here, and then transplant pumpkins into that sort of mulch there for the summer. Slow release nutrients plus a little mulch is a great opportunity there. If using bare soil of any kind, cultivations early and often until you cannot do it anymore will be the key. I will almost always have to do at least one little spot weeding of the pumpkins at some point, even if it's going into a cover crop. But then I can just sort of tiptoe through the vines and snag whatever grass came up without doing too much damage. Also, like I said, the giant pumpkin leaves will do much of that work for you. Finally, harvest with the pumpkins is easier than with, say, melons, which we'll talk about next week, which require the melons to be at a certain stage while the plants are still green to harvest. That is not the case with winter squash. The plants grow, they fruit, the plants die, then you get pumpkins. They can take a light frost, though I try to get them out before, they start getting frosted. And I don't like to leave them in the field for too many sunny days for the sun scald. I don't really think they love that, especially because since I started them early, they will probably be ready a little bit earlier, say like late August, rather than like September, October, when a lot of people are pulling their pumpkins out. I should also add that one of the reasons that I like growing them early is they kind of just beat the squash bugs. So like squash bugs can be a big issue. If you have a big issue with them, cover the plants until they start flowering with the insect netting and then pull that insect netting off. That'll help. But for us, the other tip that we found is just plant them early. If you plant them a little bit later, squash bugs are like ready for it. So if they have any sort of hard time getting established, they can get pretty eaten up. Once the plants are fully dead, I go through and clip the squash with a long-handled pair of loppers, shouts to my back, and haul it out in wheelbarrows. Now, most pumpkins do not need a long curing stage like other winter squashes. 5 to 7 days at 80 degrees Fahrenheit, that's 27 degrees Celsius, in a well-ventilated area will absolutely do the trick. Some people just leave them in the field for a few, if it's warm and dry, and again, not too hot or sunny, and that will do the curing for them. Then you would store them at cellar temperatures with good ventilation for as long as you can. For some of the pumpkins, that will only be like 2 months. Others are bred for storage and may last as long as your butternuts or close. But you'll have to read the descriptions to know which is which, to know, their longevity. Anyway, I think that's all I've got on pumpkins. What would you all add? Otherwise, another Planting and Raving Monday is in the books. See, just like rolls off the tongue. Planting and Raving Monday. And anyway, go enjoy whatever else it is you all are enjoying. Sending my love to our fallen vets and to our many vet farmers out there as well for Memorial Day. Don't forget, No Till Growers is a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That is an easy way to help us out as well. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor this show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at notillgrowers.com. Big thank you to Michelle. Big thank you to the No Till Growers Board of Directors. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and my wife Hannah for absolutely everything in the world. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a hat or a copy of my book, The Living Soul Handbook, at notillgrowers.com to support this work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of May, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to Ben Kramer 1, Jordan Swan, Tim, and Jennifer Zizou. That's a fun one to say. Zizou or Sisu or both. All right. So kicking off this week's story, the mountain people, as they were called, were complete mysteries to most of the inhabitants of the city below, or really the world. For one, even reaching the small village up in the Alps was really only possible for a few months of the year. The townspeople were also not particularly friendly or interested in outsiders. There were more than a few people who had disappeared, and there were, as it tends to be with most remote societies, rumors of cannibalism. So no one exactly wanted to go there. However, it was also rumored that the food was exquisite, so from time to time, some adventurous foodie would make the trek and come back with indeed nothing but good things to say about the food. One such foodie, Robbie, decided to make that trek one summer, but his story took an unexpected turn, and that is for tomorrow on the Mountain Stew. I think that was supposed to rhyme with dew, or sound like dew at least. I don't know. But it didn't. That's okay. We'll deal with that tomorrow. Thanks for watching and or listening. We'll see you then. Bye.